Names, places, and events in this story are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons or situations is purely coincidental. She slid the envelope across the table like it was a bill she was tired of waiting on. "Open it, Dad," Renata said. Not asked. Said. I looked at my daughter, 34 years old, tailored blazer, hair pinned back the way she wore it when she wanted to feel important, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Something quieter than that. Something that sits in the chest and doesn't move. I picked up the envelope. My hands, the ones that have carried sheetrock and poured concrete and signed every check that ever kept this family breathing, did not shake. I opened it and read the first line. I, Renata Elaine Colebrook, hereby formally sever all familial ties with Bernard Allen Colebrook, effective immediately. I set the paper down on the white tablecloth. Around us, 70-some guests were holding champagne flutes, waiting for the toast. The private dining room at Hargrove's smelled like cedar and roasted rosemary. Someone near the back laughed at something, and the sound bounced off the wood-paneled walls. Renata was still watching me. Her husband, Mitchell, stood 2 steps behind her with his arms crossed and his jaw set, the way men stand when they've rehearsed a confrontation but aren't entirely sure it's going to go the way they planned. "You embarrass me," she said, keeping her voice low enough that only the people nearest to us could hear, which was still about a dozen. "You've always embarrassed me. Tonight, I'm done pretending otherwise." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked down at the paper again. "Is this what you want?" I asked. "It's what I've wanted for years." I nodded slowly. I folded the paper back into the envelope. "All right," I said. "Then don't regret it. Friends, let me tell you how we got to that room. My name is Bernard Colebrook. I'm 63 years old. I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky, which is not a place that teaches you to talk about yourself. It teaches you to work. It teaches you that what a man is worth is measured in what he builds, not what he says he's going to build. My father carried that. His father carried that before him. I carried it too, and I suppose somewhere along the way, I forgot to explain it to my children. I had 2 kids, Renata, the older one, and my son Marcus, who is 3 years younger and as different from his sister as cedar is from concrete. Marcus called me last Christmas just to ask how my knees were holding up. Renata sent a card. No return address, I noticed. Their mother, my wife Carol, passed 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 61 days from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand through all of it, and when she was gone I kept going the only way I knew how, which was to work. Now, before I tell you the rest, I need to tell you about Hargrove's. Hargrove's Event and Dining Hall sits on a wooded hill just outside Clover Ridge, Tennessee. It seats 240 in the main hall, 110 in the private dining room where Renata held her party, and has a wraparound porch that looks out over a stand of white oak trees that were already old when I bought the land. I bought that land in 1997 with money I had saved for 19 years, working first in construction, then in commercial contracting, then running my own outfit until I had enough to do something that would last longer than a contract. I built Hargrove's myself. Not alone, I had crews. I had a foreman named Dewey who still works there, but I was on that site every day during construction. I poured some of those footings with my own hands. I know every room in that building the way you know the rooms of a house you were born in, because in a way, I was born there too. That building made me into whoever I am now. I named it Hargrove's, after Carol's maiden name. She cried when I told her. That was the last big project we worked on together before she got sick. Here is the part that matters for this story. I never told Renata I owned it. I know how that sounds. But let me explain, and I ask you to hear me out, friends, because this is the part I've spent 11 years second-guessing myself about. When I built Hargrove's, Renata was in college. She was studying business, and she had already decided, in the way that some young people do, that her father was an embarrassment. I was not a doctor or a lawyer or a finance man. I wore work boots to her graduation dinner because I came straight from a site and didn't have time to change. She didn't speak to me for 3 weeks after that. I thought, when I opened Hargrove's, that I would tell her once it was established, once she could see it was real and serious. But by then she had married Mitchell, who was in commercial real estate and who had opinions about everything, and every time I was around them, I could feel the calculation happening behind their eyes. What are you worth? What do you have? How does that reflect on us? Carol had made me promise something before she died. She held my hand in that hospital bed and she said, Bernie, don't let them love you for your money. Make them love you for you first. If they can't do that, then at least you'll know. So I kept the ownership under my company, Colebrook Holdings, which Renata knew existed in name but had never asked a single question about. The staff at Hargroves knew me as Mr. Colebrook, the owner. In Clover Ridge, most people knew who I was. But Renata lived in Nashville, moved in different circles, and had stopped asking about my life sometime around her late 20s. She knew Hargroves as a beautiful venue. She had been there twice for other people's events. She had once told Mitchell, within my earshot, that it was the only nice thing in this county. She did not know it was mine. When she called me in February to say she'd been made regional vice president at the pharmaceutical company she worked for, I was genuinely proud. Whatever she thought of me, she had worked hard. I congratulated her. When she said she wanted to hold a celebration dinner and could I help her book somewhere nice, I suggested Hargroves. I even offered to cover the cost of the private dining room, telling her I had a connection there, which was true in ways she did not understand. She said that would be fine and to please not make a big deal about it. The weeks before the party, I want to tell you honestly, were not easy. Marcus called me 2 days before the event, and I could tell by his voice he'd heard something. Marcus is perceptive the way his mother was. He doesn't lead with the thing he's worried about. He gets close to it and waits. You going to Renata's party? He asked. I am, I said. She talked to you recently? Like about anything specific? I was sitting on my back porch. It was a warm April evening, and the tree frogs were starting up. I had a glass of iced tea that I hadn't touched. Not particularly, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Dad, Mitchell has been talking about wanting to restructure how things are handled, family assets and all that. I see. I don't know exactly what they're planning. Just be careful, okay? Just be careful. I thanked him and told him I was fine. What I didn't tell him was that 3 weeks before the party, Mitchell had called me. He had been polite, which is always when Mitchell is most worth watching. He said he'd been doing some estate planning research and had found that my company, Colebrook Holdings, appeared to be the registered owner of a commercial property in Clover Ridge. He asked, in a tone that was trying to sound casual, whether that was accurate. I told him it was a business matter, and I'd be happy to discuss it at a proper time with the appropriate people. He said, Bernard, you know that property is going to need proper management eventually, someone with real experience in commercial real estate. He paused. You're not getting younger. I told him I appreciated his concern. He said, we just want to make sure things are handled correctly, for the family. I said goodnight. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The same kitchen where Carol and I had eaten breakfast for 22 years. I looked at the window above the sink, where she used to keep a small pot of herbs. There was nothing there now. I called my attorney the next morning. Gerald Wynne, who has handled my affairs for 18 years and who I trust as much as I trust anyone on this earth. I told him what Mitchell had said. I told him I wanted everything in order and I wanted him at Hargroves on the night of the party. He asked me if I was sure about that. I said I was. He asked what I expected to happen. I said I didn't know exactly, but that I wanted to be prepared for whatever it was. I arrived at Hargroves early on the evening of the party, which is something I always did, not as the owner, that night, just as a guest. Dewey met me at the side entrance, shook my hand, and told me everything was set. The private dining room was decorated the way Renata had requested. White floral arrangements, candles, a banner that said, Congratulations, VP. The tables were set for 78 guests. I counted the chairs the way I always count things, just to know. I found my seat, which was near the far end of the head table, not at the center. Renata had arranged the seating and I had been placed next to an elderly aunt who was already asleep in her chair before the appetizers arrived. Gerald arrived at 7, signed in as a guest, and sat at a table near the door. He wore his gray suit. He had a leather folder with him. We made eye contact once and that was enough. Mitchell gave a toast before dinner. He talked about Renata's trajectory, her discipline, her vision, her instincts for the business world. He said she had learned to trust her own judgment and to shed the things that held her back. He looked at me once when he said that. It was brief, almost nothing, but it was there. Renata spoke after him. She thanked her team, her friends, her husband. She thanked the venue. She did not mention me. I ate my dinner. The salmon was good. Dewey has always hired excellent kitchen staff. It was after the dessert course, when the room had loosened and people were moving between tables, that Renata came to me. She had the envelope in her hand. She set it down in front of me, and she said, "Open it, Dad. Friends, what I want to tell you about the moment that followed is this." I was not surprised. I was sad. There is a difference. Surprise is when something comes from outside what you could have imagined. Sadness is when something you've known was possible finally becomes real. I had been carrying the possibility of that envelope for years, since the graduation dinner with the work boots, since the Christmas card with no return address, since Mitchell's phone call with its barely concealed arithmetic. I read the letter. I set it down. I asked her if that was what she wanted. She said it was. I said, all right. Then she said something else. She leaned slightly forward and she said, in that same low, controlled voice, "We're also going to need you to sign over the Hargroves property to a proper management structure. Mitchell has the paperwork ready. Given your age and your," she paused, "limitations, it's the responsible thing." And there it was, friends. Not just disownment, disownment plus extraction. She wanted to remove me from the family tree and from the property deed on the same evening. Mitchell appeared at her shoulder with a second envelope, thicker than the first. "It's straightforward," he said. "Colebrook Holdings transfers Hargroves to our new LLC. You stay on as a courtesy consultant if you want. You don't have to do anything. We'll handle everything from here." I looked at him. I looked at her. I looked out at the 70-some guests in that dining room, the candles burning down, the white oak trees barely visible through the windows in the dark outside. I thought about Carol. I thought about 1,997 and the raw lumber and Dewey handing me a level on the morning we got the first walls up. I thought about what my father taught me in Harlan County, which is that a man who doesn't know what he's worth will let other people set the price. I said, before I sign anything, I think there's someone who should be part of this conversation. Renata frowned. "We don't need a Gerald," I said, a little louder. And Gerald Wynne stood up from his table near the door, smoothed his gray suit jacket, picked up his leather folder, and walked across that dining room floor with the kind of unhurried calm that only comes from knowing exactly what you're carrying. The room had started to go quiet. You know how a room does that when something is shifting. When people's instincts tell them to pay attention. Gerald introduced himself to Renata and Mitchell as my attorney of 18 years. He opened his folder. He produced, first, the full ownership documentation for Colebrook Holdings, which was registered in Tennessee and which held sole title to the Hargroves property and its associated structures. He produced the original deed from 1,997. He produced the most recent property appraisal, which he set on the table face up. He let them read the number. Then he produced a letter from me, which I had written and had him notarize 2 weeks prior, stating clearly that the property would remain in Colebrook Holdings under its current structure and would pass, upon my death, to Marcus Allen Colebrook and any other heirs as designated in my will. He slid both documents across the table toward Renata and Mitchell. Mitchell's face had done something complicated. His jaw was still set, but there was nothing behind the expression anymore. It was just the shape of confidence without the substance. Renata looked at the deed. She looked at my name on it. She looked up at me. The room was quiet now. Not completely, but enough. "You own this," she said. It was not a question. "For 26 years, I said. She looked down again at the paper. A long moment passed. "I want you to know," I said, keeping my voice low, "because this was between us and not for the room, that I never hid this to hurt you. Your mother asked me to let people love me for me first. I was trying to honor that. Maybe I was wrong about how long to wait, but I was not wrong about what I was waiting for." She didn't say anything. "The first letter you gave me tonight," I said, "the one you want me to sign, I'm going to keep it. Because you wrote it when you knew exactly what you thought of me. When you thought I had nothing. That matters. That's the truth of things." Mitchell cleared his throat. "Bernard, I think we should—" "Tonight is your wife's celebration," I said, looking at him. "I'd suggest letting it be that." He had nothing to add to that. Marcus arrived late, as he usually does. He's always been that way, my son. He got there around 9, and a friend of his who'd been at the party the whole time had called him on the way over and told him what had happened. He walked in and found me on the wraparound porch, sitting in one of the rocking chairs, looking at the white oaks. He sat down in the chair beside me without saying anything for a while. "You okay?" he finally asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Dewey told me," he said, "about Gerald being there, about the deed." Did you know she was going to do it? The letter? I thought something was coming," I said. "I didn't know the shape of it until that night." He was quiet again. The frogs were going in the trees somewhere below the porch. A car pulled out of the parking lot. "She's not a bad person," Marcus said. "I know that. She just got turned around somewhere." "I know that too." He leaned forward in his chair and looked at the darkness between the trees. He has Carol's way of going still when he's thinking, like the thought needs stillness to finish forming. "She came out to the parking lot after," he said. "Before I found you. It wasn't good." "She'll be all right," I said. "People learn things at the speed they learn them." He nodded. We sat there for a while longer, the two of us, on the porch of the building I had built and named for his mother. The candles in the dining room were burning down. I could hear the sound of guests leaving, car doors, voices tapering off. "Dad," Marcus said. "Yeah. Why didn't you just tell us? When we were younger, why'd you keep it secret so long?" I thought about how to answer that for a moment. "Because," I said, "I didn't want you boys, you and your sister, to look at this place and see a thing you were owed. I wanted you to be able to look at it and see work. See what it takes to make something last. If you'd known it was mine from the start, it would have just been furniture. Something in the background that was always going to be there." "Did it work?" he asked. "With me?" I looked at him. I looked at this man who had called me 2 days before to tell me to be careful, who had driven an hour to arrive late at a party that was already over, who was sitting with me on a dark porch asking a real question. "Yeah," I said, "with you it worked." He smiled a little. He looks like his mother when he smiles. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat. Renata called me 6 weeks later. It was a Sunday morning, and I was in the garden behind the house, which is not something I'm especially skilled at, but which Carol always loved. So I keep trying. She said she wasn't calling to apologize. She said she wasn't ready for that yet, and she didn't want to say words she didn't fully mean. I told her I respected that. She said she had been thinking about the letter, the disownment letter. She said she'd written it 3 months before the party when she'd been angry and had convinced herself it was the right thing. I said I understood. "Did you always know I felt that way?" she asked. "About you?" I thought about the honest answer. "I knew you were ashamed of me," I said. I didn't know how far that went until that night. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Mom would have been furious with me." "Yes," I said, "she would have." "Was the building was naming it Hargroves? Was that her idea?" "No," I said. "That was mine," she cried when I told her. Another silence, longer this time. "I didn't know any of that," Renata said. "You never told us stories about the building." "No," I said. "I didn't." That sat between us on the phone line for a moment. "Maybe," she said slowly, "maybe that was something you could have done differently." And you know what, friends? She wasn't wrong. I had kept too much quiet for too long, thinking silence was the same as wisdom, thinking that if I didn't talk about what I had built, the building would speak for itself. But buildings don't speak. People have to speak for them. Carol knew that. I knew it too, somewhere. I just kept forgetting. "You're probably right," I said. She didn't expect that. I could tell by the pause. "I'm not ready," she said again. "I know," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She said goodbye and hung up. I stood there in the garden with the phone in my hand and the spring sun coming through the leaves, and I thought about my father and his father, and all the quiet men in my family who built things and never explained them, and I thought that maybe the bravest thing I could do, at 63, was learn to be a little different from that. I still go to Hargroves on Tuesday mornings. I sit at the small table in the corner of the kitchen with a cup of coffee while Dewey walks me through the week. The staff knows me. The building knows me. 26 years of Tuesday mornings. On the wall inside my office there, I have kept one thing from the construction. It is not a shovel or a level or anything dramatic like that. It is a photograph, Carol and me, standing on the unfinished foundation in the fall of 1997, her in a flannel shirt, me in my work boots, both of us squinting in the afternoon light. We look young. We look tired. We look like people who believe in what they're doing. I don't show that photograph to many people, but I know it's there. That's enough.